You know, we spend a lot of time talking about the solidarity of being a writer. You gotta sit by yourself a lot. Those quiet hours spent battling word counts, wrestling with outlines, and of course trying our hardest to refine our author voice. But what happens when you step outside of that bubble and invite someone else in to your creative space? Hey, that's right. Of course, often overlooked is the spirited collaboration. See, collaboration can really help to elevate one's craft and build relationships at the same time. I shall repeat that. Collaboration can really help you elevate your craft, but it can also, and more importantly, build relationships at the same time. For many of us writers, collaborating with others sounds intimidating. It means sharing control, accepting criticism on the fly, and potentially bending your vision to meet someone else's needs. But I promise you, working with another writer is one of the fastest, most effective ways to break bad habits and dramatically enhance your skills and your craft. When you collaborate, you gain an immediate feedback board because you are working in tandem. You're basically forced to articulate your choices, justify your character's motivations, and quickly adapt your style when the narrative takes a sudden, unexpected turn from your partner or partners. This process builds essential writing muscles, flexibility, clarity, and perhaps most importantly, humility. That's right. So today, we're going to be talking about collaboration writing exercises to develop your writing craft. Because who doesn't want to do that? Anyway, before we jump into today's lesson, please subscribe. If you like what you've been watching and you just haven't done so already, please hit subscribe and the bell icon. Let's get into it. The pass along scene. You gotta pass it along. If you've never heard of the pass along scene exercise, well, it focuses mostly on momentum and pacing. It is an exercise designed to maintain a narrative momentum and also challenge writers to adapt quickly to unspecific shifts. Ultimately, the setup is you and your author friend, the person you're working with, each agree on one element. Let's say a location, ergo, maybe an airport, a quiet office, two chairs, whatever, and an object of importance. For example, it could be a silver briefcase with gold light when you open it up. Now, the process, though, is writer A starts by writing the first 3 paragraphs of the scene, introducing one character and a hint of the central conflict. Ultimately, writer A would stop right as tension is rising. Writer B would then take over immediately. They must read the last sentence and write the next 3 paragraphs, escalating the conflict or introducing a new character or obstacle. Continue passing the story back and forth, writing 3 paragraphs at a time until you reach a natural point of closure, or until you've completed 3 rounds each. Ultimately, at the end, what you would do is analyze. You would review the finished piece, discuss where the transitions were strongest, where they struggled a bit, and how the other writer's choices either forced you to improve the pacing or create a surprising new direction. Oh, yeah. What I really like about this exercise is ultimately that, one writer gets to kind of focus on their beat, and then the next writer gets to focus on their beat. You don't really have to worry about tone or style as far as author voice goes, just because one person is a little bit more lyrical and the other might be a little bit more mechanical, or it might be a mixture of the two. The whole point is about recognizing movement, narrative movement. So whatever, it's the yes and element of improvisation. If you've ever been in improv or understood comedy in any sense, there is a sense of yes and. You could do this in drama, by the way, as well. If it's whatever situation comes or is on the page, you take that, accept the premise of where it's going, and then add an element to it. So this helps you naturally understand your own writing as well. So if you ever find yourself just continuously doing this and then this and then this and then this exercise will help you identify when and where ultimately you look at a piece and you go, how do I add an element to this? Because I can accept the premise of this happened, but now how do I add another element to that? That elevates it or moves it. The other aspect of this exercise that I really like is that you might be going one way and then their brain goes another way. And now you can't go back to your original thought. You got to take what is going on in the new adjustment and yes, end them, adding your own details to the evolution of that piece. So it just gives you a chance to sort of improvise and use that brain tool. All right, the character exchange. This is also a really fun one. The character exchange ultimately focuses on the consistency of voice for a character. This exercise on basically how to interpret characters. What I like about this is, as a hired gun, to write other people's stuff, either a screenplay, script, or a novel. It's a good way to see if there's previous books and stuff like that, how to really analyze a character's voice and understand their positions, their choices, what they do or don't do, say or don't say, etc., etc. So this is really fun because one of you is going to develop the voice in the beginning, and then the other kind of gets to play with it. So the setup is you and your author friend each create one character. All right. This ultimately, think about not on the page, not writing a scene, but you're thinking about also ultimately a character profile, and you want to understand the character's positions, maybe their core motivations. I would suggest core motivations. Maybe even 3 or 4 distinct verbal tics or speech patterns. Do they use, which ultimately means, do they use sarcasm? Do they contradict themselves? Are they a liar? Are they honest? Do they live by a certain code? Whatever the case is. Do they always repeat the last word? Because this is Joey 2 times. I got to get the paper. All right. So once you both have an understanding of the characters that you basically wrote down, the process is ultimately swapping the character profiles. Each writer writes a short monologue or internal scene, no more than 200 words, using the other person's character. The scene should focus on a moment where the character's fear directly challenges their motivations and positions. More importantly, what I would like to add to this exercise is that, remember, this is how you decide if you're able to write within that character's voice, even though you didn't come up with it, but you're able to find what's truthful in you and connect it to what's truthful in the profile. The other thing you could do is, once you have done these exercises and you both agree that, hey, we're writing in the voices, then write a scene with the characters going back and forth. So take both those characters, and one writer writes a scene with that character, and the other writer, which would be you, writes another scene with both characters. So it's a really nice thing. The other aspect of this exercise is analyzing what needs to be done. So, oh, the cat's here. I'm not even live. And she's like, hey, what's going on, guys? So when you're analyzing, you want to compare the 2 monologues. Did the other writer accurately capture the character's voice that you created? Were there inconsistencies or consistencies with the motivations or the way they do or do not do, they say or do not say? All right. And ultimately discuss what details you relied on. Okay. What stuck out in the profile and what you felt you had to invent or basically play with to find the real truth in that character. It's a fun part of it. The third and final exercise to this is the structural remix. The structural remix, basically you're focusing on theme, interpretation, which is a complete and complex exercise that is testing the different ways we perceive things. This is very important. One of the values of being a writer is there are different perspectives involved in the presentation, right? There is the perspective that we feel we are presenting. There's the perspective of the characters and what they believe is happening on the page. And what that means is, I, as a writer, have an idea of what I want the scene to be, and I am perceiving it as is because I'm writing it. I have a bias. But then the characters might not be honest and truthful. So they are presented through their interpretation of the information, and they might be misleading, an unreliable narrator. But then you have the interpretation of the reader. And all 3 of those things might not always align. There's an old analysis where they go, we studied the blue curtains in the room for days in class, and ultimately, like, it means, like, sadness, or the fall of this or whatever. And then the writer comes in, and they go, oh, we studied the blue curtains. What do they really mean? We want to see if we're right. And the author goes, oh, they're just blue curtains. Because sometimes it is what it is. It just is, right? But the interpretation is a fun part of the writing process, because how you approach a scene is a part of that interpretation. How characters interact with that scene is interpretation. And of course, how a reader perceives it is interpretation, right? So what I like about this particularly is that, you might take something like a machine is invented that can perfectly predict the weather 1 year in advance, right? So you're going to basically agree on a very simple slash high concept premise. A machine is invented that can perfectly predict the weather 1 year in advance, right? So writer A, this is the process. Writer A writes a short scene, 300 words, whatever, focusing only on the external plot and the consequences of the machine. Basically, stock market crashes, clothing manufacturers go to whatever, right? And you're saying, but Thomas, I can't write that in 300 words. You'd be surprised. So go to 600 to 1,000 words. It's up to you. Now, writer B is going to write an equally short, or up to 1,000 words, using the exact same premise, but they are going to focus on the story of the narrative, which is the internal psychological or philosophical themes. Basically, a person loses their sense of hope or spontaneity because the future is known. All right. So you're going to take the same element, the same idea. It could be whatever you want, but for my example, I wrote a machine is invented that can perfectly predict the weather 1 year in advance. So one is focused on plot only, which is the things that need to happen, and the other one is focused mostly or entirely on the character's experiences and choices within that premise. If I were you, you could even do something more fun. You could have one of you just write plot. This is what needs to happen, and not go into the internal processing or the immersion, and then have you or the other writer, whatever, it depends who goes first, and you go back in and you add the immersion, you add the processing, you add the internal emotional truth. And that's another way to approach this. But basically, you want to go through and analyze to see if it is accomplishing the same premise, the same plot, but the story is not devolving just because one is focused more internally and one is focused more on the external factors. All right, before we get to the right mindset perspective, just remember that I have makerightlefthere.com. You can check out all my books. I have books available. I got 3 books currently. We got the 27 plot point outline. We have the Death of the King, which is exclusively available on the Patreon. And then, of course, we have my first book in a series of 5 for how to be successful in entertainment. This includes writer. All right, the right mindset perspective. My goal is that, I love doing these Friday videos because I really do hope that these exercises and other videos that I do on Fridays are more fun and more creative and less like lesson driven. But they help you find your potential. They allow you the tools and ideas to sort of think beyond what we know, what you know. Because remember, as writers, we're always trying to grow and evolve. But remember, the idea of this exercise is collaboration. Find people you trust and believe in, people that inspire you, people you inspire. And it's all about building and cultivating relationships. Do you need just 2 people? No, you can have 3, you can have 4. You just expand the concept of these exercises. But you do need to work together when it comes to analyzing it as well, because that's part of the exercise. Analyzing anything is tool related to your craft, right? You want to see what's being said, what's not being said, what is being missed, and what is dead on, right? And this is why when you're doing this, you have to treat these challenges, ultimately, these exercises, as a way to face the critique monster, like the comfortability of accepting feedback without taking it as a personal attack, okay? Because it is ultimately about craft. It is ultimately about not only building your skill level, but building that craft within you to accept a critique. I'm just saying. All right. Next video in this series, we will be talking about the It's a flash fiction exercise. We'll focus on improving your ability to write, basically a narrative, right? The exercise will involve writing a complete narrative in under 500 words and analyzing the use of the language and imagery. And you might be saying, but Thomas, how do you write something in 500 words? Because remember, if you can't, all right, I was working, just a quick aside. I was working on a screenplay and I was working with a group and I wanted to really see what their voices were as writers. And I says, hey, I want you to write a monologue, but it needs to be a scene and there needs to be movement. It can't just be, this was a screenplay though. I was like, it can't just be like 3 pages of dialogue. There has to be movement. There has to be a story being told through this monologue. And, 1 second. And the restriction was that you only get 3 pages, basically 3 to 4 pages. Maybe it was 5 pages. It was like we wanted it to be 5 minutes, so five pages basically. But one of the writers came back, and I was like, "Oh, nothing's really happening until like page 4." And they're like, "Well, it's hard to really establish character or anything of note. You have to get to it, And I says, "No, page 1, line 1. You can absolutely bring in character. It's their behavior. It's the words they say or don't say. It's the things they do or don't do." So their pushback was, I need 5 pages or 4 pages to get to the character. So in flash fiction, 500 words to tell a story, it's more than enough because you should be already telling the story in the opening. It should begin with setup, context, right? And that context and setup is through the characters. The other writers involved, we read their works, and lo and behold, somebody, did one thing that was very character driven. The other person was dealing with the existential crisis. The other person had multiple personality syndrome. But it was within first page, we were already seeing the development of a character and movement. And it's very, very possible. Your first passage should be doing some great work as much as the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. If you need a page to develop a character, right? You need, passage 1 is I'm going to use 5 sentences just to ultimately explain the history. And then passage 2 is going to explain who they are. And then passage 3, no, get into the movement. That's going to be a fun exercise. Other than that, if you like what you saw today, please, again, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss out. And if you found this information helpful, this exercise playful, give it a thumbs up. Apparently, YouTube loves it, and so does the algorithm. Other than that, I'm Thomas J. Bellezza, and as always, keep developing the right mindset. I'll see you next time. Boom.